Hello, all. Let us discuss the main points raised by David Crystal in his book Language and the Internet, which was published in 2004. In the beginning of the book, Crystal talks about the concerns that different authors and other famous people have regarding the influence of technology on many things, like how technology affects society, social relationships, communication, or economy as such, politics, many things. But Crystal's concern is basically with regard to the influence of technology on language. So that is why he has titled this book Language and the Internet. So he begins by talking about the influence of technology in language. And there is a very relevant question. There is a very relevant question that Crystal brings about in the beginning itself of the chapter, the first chapter, which is titled A Linguistic Perspective. So in that chapter, he begins by discussing about looking at technology from a linguistic perspective, from the viewpoint of language. So the first question that he puts forth in that chapter is, because of this technological advance with regard to internet, the arrival of internet, will language end up as a casualty, or will language be in danger because of the arrival of technology? So he talks about how will be language endangered by technology. He discusses that in detail throughout the chapter. So one example he brings about in the first part is, will this technology have linguistic creativity and flexibility? Because when we talk of internet, where people write and many people around the world can reach, right? So it's available for people throughout the world who can access internet. So when there are many readers, in order to suit the needs of all the readers, will we end up in a kind of sameness, that is, all the people using the same kind of language, which will be a disadvantage as far as language is concerned, because we have many languages, right? In that sense, it would be like we have one world language which will pronounce an end to the different varieties of language. So it will affect, so if there is only one language, it might affect creativity. We cannot think in a new way, and language will not be as flexible as it is now. So that is one major concern that he raises, and he proves his point by bringing out many examples of inventions that happened before this internet. That is, again, in communication technology, if we take the example of 15th century, in 15th century, with the arrival of printing, initially, even though now we consider it as a blessing, initially people were apprehensive, people had concerns. What was the example? Was this religious concern, and especially the church felt that it is an invention of Satan, because when you have printing, your ideas are easily available and distributed, so you cannot have a censoring or control on the kind of information that will be conveyed. So that was one fear. Uncensored ideas would affect social order. That was one thing. Then again, when because of printing technology, Gutenberg's first Bible was printed. So again, people had this concern, that is, unorthodox biblical translations would come up. So people wanted to extend censorship to secular books. at least. So all these concerns were there. Then again, when telegraph was introduced, people feared that it would affect family, and then it might even promote crime. Telephone, again, when it came, people were worried that will it affect the society in some way, its value systems and things like that. And with broadcasting, radio, television and all these things, people were afraid that these technical tools will be used as a medium to spread propaganda, or a particular ideas will be spread through this, because it can reach so many people, it can influence so many people. So people were afraid in the beginning that only selected voices will be heard. So when these select voices were heard throughout the world, people were worried that it might even affect the pronunciation, because you're only hearing a particular pronunciation. So will that affect language quality, and will it affect local dialects and accents? Was also a matter of concern for many people. Again, David Kripstel comes back to the main point that he was discussing, that is, how can internet influence language? So we understand that internet is being used by many people globally now, and being used very frequently also. So how is it affecting language? And not just language. Here one thing you have to note down is he's primarily concerned with the effect of internet on individual languages, because as we mentioned earlier, with regard to language, it is not just one. We have many languages, to the point of calling it individual, right? So how will this kind of a development in technology affect individual languages is his particular concern. That is, the way we use language on internet, is it different from our earlier linguistic behavior in the sense how we have been using language. Our community has been using a language throughout a period of time. So that's something that has been revolutionized. If internet is affecting language in such a way, then we can call it, because of internet revolution, it has resulted in a sort of linguistic revolution. So that is something he brings about, but at the same time he is also careful to highlight that even though we have this technological advancement, it is still denied to many people because of economic reasons, or maybe it is only available in developed countries. And remember, this book was written in the early 21st century, so now it has changed, but still we cannot assure that it is available to everyone. So that problem is also there. So that is why he questions, can we call it a global village or a global language, because we have now terms like digital citizens, like netizens, the virtual community of such people, and we even have a term like net generation, people who were born into this into a time when already there was this advancement, and they started using it, so they are more used to internet, or they are more comfortable with this technology than other generations. So all these things are there, but Kripstel is concerned about this main thing, that how this technology will result in a sort of techno-babble. That is the word he uses, techno-babble. Babble, we all know, meaningless speech or something like that. So because of this technology, maybe one example is we are using a lot of we are making a lot of changes in spellings and things like that, right? Short forms and things like being emerged. So he calls that kind of techno-babble. People, because of technology, we are engaging in a sort of babble. And so he's wondering whether it is possible in this kind of net language to consider varieties
and especially individual dialects. So when we develop a net language, will that language consider the varieties? Will it accommodate individual dialects? Because why do we need? So obviously this question will be there. Why shouldn't we have a global language? Sameness. So earlier we discussed one problem is it will not allow creativity, and it will not be flexible. We might always have to correspond or speak or express in the structure that this global language advocates. So that problem is there. Then also sometimes, what is language to us? Language is an integral part of a culture, right? It helps us to express our needs, our attitude, everything. So we need at least to be able to customize it to our needs, our culture. So will that be with internet is an important question he brings about. Before further moving on to the influence of technology on language, David Crystal points out or defines internet for us. So what is internet? Basically, how it functions is like it is an association of computer networks with common standards which enable messages to be sent from any central computer. So the term for such central computers, we refer to such central computers as host computer, because it is the main computer. So there is a main computer which is called host, which sends certain messages to the networks which are connected. So that what happens is messages are sent from one host to another host. I think you might have got a general idea about this with the help of the video that was posted about internet in the class. So this is a basic definition of internet. There are many networks connected. Networks are connected to a host, and then hosts are connected to each other. So that is how base messages happen. So this was developed in 1960s in USA. And with the arrival of internet, what happened was that it enabled primarily communication between people, especially through emails and things like that, so that it became a cyberspace. So what is a cyberspace? Which means information is available. It is a world in itself. It is like we have many countries. Maybe this is another country in a way. It is a cyberspace, cyber world, we say, because world of information. And how is the information preserved there? In digital format. And that's why it's also called as information superhighway, because information. So in that world, in the roads of that world, which are the vehicles that travel, information passed on from one place to another. So these are the different technical terms you can remember. And another important noteworthy thing which tells us how much importance we give to this technology or to the internet is specified by the use of initial capital letter. So usually whenever we use initial capital letter in a word, it means that we are giving some sort of an respect to that word or whatever it is. That's why we have names. Whenever we write names, we first letter in capital letters, so that we are kind of respecting that person. So it is a sort of respect that we show through written language. So many other things, like we have many developments. Inventions usually don't have a capital letter in the initial capitals in the word as such. Like we have printing, publishing, radio, television. All these things are inventions like internet, but we never use initial capital letter with television or radio. T and R are sometimes, if they don't occur in the beginning of a sentence, we don't capitalize it. But please note this, words like internet and net to denote to internet. We have like an English word, we also have another net which refers to fishing net and things like that. There N is not capital. But if you're referring to internet, short form of internet, net, you should capitalize the first word letter N. And I in internet should also be capitalized whenever you use it in a sentence. So that itself shows the importance we give to this technology. And that is why, so we have already mentioned, we have a country or a world called cyberspace, passing through the highways. So we should have people there, right? Who are the people of this cyberspace? They are called as netizens. That is regular citizen of internet. You are not just that you surf internet or browse through the resources once in a while, but if you use internet regularly, you can be called or referred to as a netizen. So you spend a considerable amount of time on internet. So that is why he makes us think. So how would a life in a day of a netizen be? He might get up in the morning, and from morning itself he might start using the internet, and people like netizens will form a community which is called as a virtual community. So they have this community there, and they engage in conversation, communications, and this type of communication is called real-time communication. So what is a real-time communication? Real-time communication means when you are writing, for example, if it's a letter, we cannot call it real-time communication. A written letter means I am writing it, I have to post it, and it has to reach another person. Only then that person will be able to read it. But in real-time communication, the moment I'm writing something, the other person can read it. Like, for example, now we have WhatsApp messages and things like that. They are real-time communication because at the same time, simultaneously, somebody is writing and at the same time, somebody is reading. So that is called as real-time communication, real-time. So netizens always engage in such real-time communications most of the day. So that is why he even asks us, there are certain symptoms to look out to know whether we are internet driven. That is, we are addicted to internet. How do we know that? If we always keep our net on, and then we wake up in between at night just to check up, for some other purpose, but at the same time we cannot go to sleep before having a look at the mobile or whatever device is there. We refer to, in our language itself, vocabulary itself, such technological terms related to internet often come, and sometimes we check our mail or WhatsApp once, and then we see no messages, but still again after 2 minutes we look again. So all these things denote the whether we have become addicted to internet. In order to prove how important language varieties are, David Crystal now brings about the different features of language, that is, different varieties of language that we have. So what is a language variety? It means it is a system of linguistic expression which is governed by situational factors. What does that mean? Like, we have spoken language and written language. It is different in many ways, right? Then we have differences based on region, class, sometimes even occupation. Like, we have legal language, scientific language, then creative language. All these are different in many ways in the way they are expressed, styles of expression. So what happens is, when we have such language varieties, we know how to speak or write in a particular context. That is why it is systematic and predictable. We know if we go to a court, what kind of language will we hear, right? Or if we read a poem, what will be the style of the language used in that literary medium? All these are very much rules are laid down for this. It is predictable. It is very orderly or systematic. So all these things are there. So what are the language varieties that we have? We have graphic varieties, orthographic or graphological varieties, grammatical varieties, lexical varieties, discourse varieties, phonetic varieties, and phonological varieties. So let's look at each of these in detail. First, if we look at graphic features of a language. So it basically means general presentation and organization of written language. So graphical is mostly in relation to written language. We cannot see how a spoken language is written. When it is spoken, we cannot see the language, right? Only when it is written, we view or read the language. So it means how typography means how it is written, maybe the design, because sometimes right? In Arabic, we write from in a different way compared to the other languages. You start side left to right, whereas there it is from right to left. So such differences are there, and difference in symbols, like maybe people usually say with regard to Hindi. Hindi, it is like how letters are being hanged. They're hanging on a line or something like that. It is with regard to the design. So that is graphical representation. Or maybe you can design. When we talk about design, we have this example of newspaper. There is a particular design to newspaper, how it is structured. There are headlines, columns, captions, and things like that. So that is graphic. Now next variety is orthographic or graphological. So what is the difference here? It is with regard to how individual languages are written. Like they have spelling differences. We know British English and American English, many things are different. Spellings are different. For example, the spelling of color. British people often use a lot of U, whereas Americans eliminate U. You have C-O-L-O-U-R in British English and C-O-L-O-R in American English. Then we have different ways in which alphabet is written, capital letters are written, and things like that. Punctuation differences are there. So all these will come under orthographic or graphological. Then we have grammatical features, like how we structure, that is with regard to syntax. Syntax means structure. Okay, how sentence or words are structured in a sentence. So that might also be different. When we are in a religious context, the structure will be different. We have archaic old English uses and things like that, where we, with respect, we say thou, thee, and all with regard to you. So all these differences are there. So that is morphology. Like we have a particular form. Syntax means structure and morphology means form. So we have in English we have strict morphology. Like we have SVO pattern, subject followed by verb and object. So there are sentences. So that is one variety. Then we have lexical features. So what is lexical? With regard to vocabulary of a language, that is set of words, idioms, etc. used within a language variety, and that is something that makes a language very rich, right? We know how important proverbs and idioms are in a language. It determines the culture of a language. It is very, very culture specific. It mainly deals with the everyday realities of the people using that language. So such a variety is also seen in language, lexical variety. So here again about the words used in a legal context, or maybe even technological context. Now we have when we have mail, when we mail a person, we always use this. If we have an attachment, we mention in the message, please find the attachment. So all these attachment, all these things are words used in a particular context. It's a vocabulary of technological vocabulary, right? So those are examples of lexical features. Now we have discourse features, that is with regard to how it is structured, in written. All these are basically with regard to written language. So how it is structured in written language, how the text is organized. You have fixed sections. That is where many people go wrong usually in written language, because if you're asked to write an essay, there is a particular structure that you have to follow. You have to start with introduction, then each paragraph you will bring in a particular point which elaborated with examples in that paragraph. Next paragraph you have another point with regard to the main topic, and then finally you summarize in the conclusion. So all these are discourse varieties. So that is to be followed. Then along with that, he also adds two features, that is phonetic and phonological. What do you mean by that? Phonetic means, as you all know, it is spoken language, the characteristics of spoken language, the voice quality, register. What does register mean? Register means the kind of bars or the kind of changes that you make there. Modality, how this voice changes if you are singing, if you are chanting. For example, you can take example with, you can elaborate with this with example from news reading. A person who's reading a news has a particular tone, right? Modality, register. A person who's like a priest in a church speaks in a particular way, his tone is very much determined. Then advertisement has a particular tone. Maybe you can even take this example of telephone recorded messages, they have a particular tone. So all these are phonological features of a language. So these are the basic distinctive features of language enumerated by David Crystal. And why written language? Usually we say spoken language is primary, but when it comes to language, it becomes primary because most of the information we find on internet is written. Of course, we have videos and audios, and nowadays we also have technological advancements like text to speech, where you might have written text, but still you can the device will read it to you, because there is this application called text to speech. So all these things are there, but still primarily it is written language. The information is text based rather than spoken. So that is why he is bringing out such features of language.